Good afternoon, everyone. It's very, very nice to see old friends, former students on the screen. And welcome back to another conversation that we are hosting and casting from our offices here at the Azrieli Institute of Israel Studies. Many, if not all of you know me already. My name is Csaba Nikolenyi. I'm director of the Institute and also professor at the Department of Political Science here at Concordia. And we invited you to this. I guess the genre for this event would be really a lunch and learn, which would give me an opportunity to share some preliminary data and some preliminary insights into the recently concluded municipal elections, the municipal electoral exercise that Israeli voters completed. Now, there is so much happening in Israel and in Israel's immediate neighborhood right now that, of course, occupies the headlines, that occupies the attention of much of the world. Even for many Israelis, the local elections very, very quickly came and went. Even though prior to October 7th, prior to the massacre that devastated the lives of so many of our kibbutzim in Otef Aza and has resulted in the war that is still ongoing, that Israel is waging against Hamas. So prior to October 7th, there was actually quite a bit of excitement and quite a bit of attention being paid by analysts and pundits to what was shaping up to be a very interesting local election campaign, initially scheduled to be held in late October. Then, in the light of the events that transpired after October 7th, the vote had to be cancelled and postponed 2 more times. Initially, the idea was to have the local elections later in the calendar year, and eventually the final date was determined to be set for February 27th for the first round in the 2-round elections, and with the second round in those municipalities where the first round wasn't conclusive, that they were held just very recently on March 10th. More about the process and the system in a minute. Now, before I would begin, let me just share with you a couple of points by way of a general outline of what I would like to, how I would like to structure this conversation. And my expectation is that I would try to speak for probably not a lot longer than about half an hour, 35 minutes or so. And then if you have any questions, comments, I would be very, very happy to, of course, engage. And if you have questions, even after the talk, by all means, please shoot an email. We can continue the conversation also that way. So what I would like to do first is to say a few words about the nature of the electoral system and the electoral process in Israel as far as local elections are concerned. Then I would like to say a few words about the nature of turnout, electoral participation in Israel's local elections in a historical perspective, and also zeroing in on what actually happened in the 2024 local elections. In the thesis of point number 2 is that the data are very, very clear, and this much we have already seen, that electoral participation dropped significantly, perhaps not so surprising given the fact that these elections had to take place in the context of the ongoing war. And then I would like to, but there are some important variations across the types of municipalities and the types of populations that constitute electoral majorities in the various populations, in the various municipalities. And that variation is something that I would like to zero in on. The third important point I would like to highlight has to do with the rate of participation and the rate of success of women candidates in the local elections. One of the important, still unresolved issues, if you will, of local politics in Israel is how to increase, how to empower, how to encourage stronger participation and stronger success rate by female candidates. And unfortunately, this election didn't really show much of an improvement in that regard, although there are some individual success stories from various municipalities that I would like to also mention. And finally, last but certainly not least, I would like to talk about the broader national significance of the local elections. And why that is the case, of course, has to do with the fact, for two reasons, really. As we see more and more calls for debates about Israel going to the polls and have national elections sometimes in the near future. And certainly, if you remember or if you paid attention to the very strongly worded statement by Congressman Chuck Schumer demanding that Prime Minister Netanyahu hold elections as soon as possible, which would kind of put also the record of the government on a national referendum, so to speak. Well, if national elections are going to be happening anytime soon within the reasonable future, then these local elections can serve, and they were certainly looked at this way, as a very important barometer of how people, how Israelis on the ground, in the particular localities where they live, how they feel about the various national camps, about the various national blocks of political parties. In other words, and of course, to the extent that the local elections can serve and do serve as a barometer for what might follow in the next national elections, this is, of course, the results of these elections can serve as a very, very important tool that political parties can use in terms of their already current negotiations with each other, with respect to the shape of the coalition in the Knesset, with respect to the balance of powers between government and opposition, and of course, with respect to the formation of prospective electoral alliances. So in that regard, this is very, very important. There is another important reason why the 2024 local elections are very, very important, and that stems from the fact that a number of very important national level political parties, so political parties that are in the Knesset today, specifically, I'm referring to Mr. Benny Gantz's National Blue and White, which is the larger constituent faction of the National Unity or the National Camp Alliance that he formed together with Gideon Sa'ar's Tikva Hadasha, or the New Hope political party. Both of these political parties participated in local elections for the first time, as did another very important member of the coalition, and that is Itamar Ben-Gvir's Otzma Yehudit, or Jewish power. So in an important sense, then, the local elections of 2024 provided the first very important electoral test on the ground for some of these new political parties. And in a few minutes, I'm going to show why that actually matters, why and how the involvement of national political parties in these local polls actually plays a very important role. So we can actually use these elections as an important tool, as an important opportunity to forecast what might be happening in the next national elections. So with all of that in the background, let me just share with you some general points, general statistics about the local elections that we have just concluded. So not every municipal authority, not every locality could, of course, hold local elections. There were 12. If you see on the in the second bottom row in the middle of the screen, you'll see that in 12 municipal authorities, 5 in the south, and 7 in the northern district of the country, could not hold local elections for the obvious reasons of the devastation that happened in Otaf Aza, and the subsequent military operation just couldn't render the conduct of these elections there possible. And for the same reason, the evacuation for military reasons, for military purposes, of several of the municipal authorities in the north rendered the conduct of the elections there just not possible at this time. But apart from that, 197 local and 44 regional authorities conducted elections. And for an electorate, so for a total voting population, for an eligible electorate of just over 7 million. So this is quite remarkable to keep in mind that while the country is at war in terms of a very concrete military sense in Gaza, and while the country is suffering from tremendous economic and social dislocation, as so many of the evacuees from the Otef region, as well as from the northern border region with Lebanon, are evacuated, it's really quite striking to consider that what a major electoral and political exercise and an exercise in democracy this really was. Really reaching out and mobilizing just over 7 million voters. Now, of course, not all of them participated, as we'll see in a few minutes from the turnout data, but it's an important point in keep in mind still. In order to further stress and impress upon us the enormity of this electoral exercise, and of course behind the actual conduct and the actual right of the act of voting, it's very important to note that the Interior Ministry has been, of course, very hard at work in setting up the infrastructure for the elections, to print the ballot papers, to organize the establishment and the staffing of the polling booths. And that was no mere exercise, especially in the combat zones in the Gaza Strip. But more about that in a few minutes. Now, this exercise in local democracy also involved the fielding of candidates, and there were just under 25,000 individual politicians, not professional, of course, yet, but individuals, Israelis, who entered the local electoral arena running as candidates for the municipal authority councils. And the total number of lists on which they ran was just under 4,000. So you see the data in the last brick, in the last square of the top row. Now, in Israel, the elections, the local elections, and here I'm showing you an example from the Jerusalem campaign, is using an electoral system that we sometimes call a mixed electoral system, sometimes we call a dual ballot system. Essentially, the gist of the local electoral system is that voters have two ballots to cast. And you see this very clearly on the campaign poster of the incumbent mayor of Jerusalem, Moshe Leon, who is also the re-elected mayor of Jerusalem. In the top left corner of this flyer, you see the two ptakim, the two ballots that he is asking his supporters to consider dropping into the envelopes and then eventually to the ballot box. So on election day, every Israeli voter is presented with a choice from a yellow and from a white ballot, and these are stacks. These are available in each polling station. The yellow ballot is for your choice of a mayoral candidate whom you would like to lead the municipal authority. So in this case, in the case of Jerusalem, the yellow ballot paper stood, of course, for Moshe Leon. This is what this particular candidate, the mayor, asked his followers to keep in mind. And of course, all the other candidates who are duly registered for the election would have a corresponding yellow petek, a yellow ballot with their names printed on it. And then the white ballot is for a list, for the list of candidates. Think of it as a closed party list that corresponds to the political party that the voter might choose to support. In this particular case, Moshe Leon actually organized the formation of a political party that he led, and you can read that clearly on the white ballot. He formed a political party called One Jerusalem, Yerushalayim Achat, Bershut Moshe Leon, led by Moshe Leon. So he asked his supporters to vote for him as a candidate with the yellow ballot and vote for his party using the white ballot. And of course, some voters may choose to respond to that and cast a joint ticket, if you will, but you don't have to. You can also split your ticket and support a mayoral candidate while denying the mayoral candidate supporting his particular political party. And that, by the way, as we'll see later on, is exactly what happened to Moshe Leon. While he came back with a landslide majority, he defended his mayoral incumbency. His political party didn't do well at all. Like last time, 5 years ago, his political party actually didn't win any seats. Now he has a couple, but he's certainly very far from having any kind of even a plurality on this on the council of the Jerusalem municipality. So it's for this reason that it's important to consider the number of mayoral candidates who were running. So please keep in mind that for the just about 200 mayoral offices available, there were 800 candidates running. So clearly, in most municipalities, the competition was, or the election for the mayoralty was very significantly contested. Now, the number of women and the percentage of female candidates was continues to be very low. Only 83, which represents about 15% of the 801 mayoral candidates were women. And it's also important to point out and keep in mind that a little bit over half of the mayoral candidates were rookies, or were individuals who entered the electoral exercise, the electoral race for the first time. Now, one very important contextual detail I would like to point out has to do with the combat zones, right? Soldiers in Israel, while they are on duty, have the right to vote. And certainly this is nothing new. You might remember from those of you who studied Israeli political history, the very right after the foundation of the state. I mean, Israel was in a state of war, and a very important reason why the closed list party list based electoral system was adopted as the electoral system for Israel at the national level was its simplicity. It actually allowed voters and people who were on active duty at that state of war to be able to participate in the election. It's of course much more difficult if you have an electoral system that is based on geographically designed electoral districts. So there were 12 special military polling stations set up in the combat zone in the Gaza Strip, where soldiers were able to cast their ballot a week before the actual election took place. Now, let me just show you an example and an illustration of what actually took place and how the army, because this obviously meant that the IDF, the military, had to be much more involved in allowing soldiers participation in the election than normally it would be the case. So on the website of the IDF, you could inform yourself and you could have very detailed instructions. I'm just showing you on the right-hand side of the screen the information pamphlet and the summary of it that the IDF made available for soldiers so that they would know how to actually cast their vote for their local councillor candidates and for their local mayoral candidates. Of course, if you were a soldier in the combat zone, you were not able to go back to your polling station. So everything had to be designed in a very flexible way in the Gaza Strip so that the soldiers, who you see two of them waiting for their turn to cast their ballot, could also exercise their democratic right. And essentially, what the IDF did was to allow, so the same kind of information was made available for, the same choice was made available for the voting soldiers, except, of course, you couldn't bring pre-printed ballot papers to the ballot booths. I mean, these two soldiers that you are looking at might very well be registered residents of two different municipalities. Maybe the one on the left-hand side is a voter registered in Jerusalem, while the one on the right-hand side maybe is a registered voter in Rehovot. So obviously, the army cannot bring pre-printed ballot papers for the various municipalities in the required quantities. That would be just way too complicated. So instead, what the army made available was both electronically through a QR code, as well as in hard copy pamphlets that gave in the polling stations clear information to soldiers about who the candidates were for mayor in all the different municipalities in the country, and then also who the various candidates were for. So it was a rather thick booklet, who the various candidates were for council and the political parties that were running these candidates in the various localities. So if you were a soldier who also is a registered voter in Jerusalem, you would enter the polling station, you pick up these booklets, and you look through, you look up the information for Jerusalem, and you look at who the various candidates are running for mayor, and then you also do the same to consult who the various parties are and who their candidates are that are being fielded for the municipal council. And then your ballot papers, which would be pre-printed if you were voting as a civilian, here they were blank. In other words, the soldiers had to handwrite in their choice of a mayoral candidate on the yellow ballot, and they had to enter either the name of the party list or the symbol of the party on the white ballot that they supported. And the same rules applied in terms of that apply also to the regular pre-printed ballots in terms of not entering confusing or additional information, making sure that you're not defacing, that you're not putting emojis or anything that might affect, influence, or take away from the information value that your ballot is supposed to be communicating. So that was a very important feature of the way in which the polling was conducted in the combat zones. Now, I would like to now turn and spend a few minutes on talking about the nature of electoral turnout. And here I'm going to show you first a graph that shows us the history of electoral turnout rates in Israel's national elections, so elections to the Knesset. And this is information that was reported, that's made available through the various very important papers published by the Israel Democracy Institute, available in Hebrew. Some of it, but not all of their work, is also available in English. So this is a very important graph that shows us some contextual information. So please refer to the red line first, as that line shows changes in the voter turnout rates in national elections. And then next, please refer to the blue line, which shows us changes and fluctuations in the turnout rates in Israel's local elections. Now, a couple of important points, points need to be highlighted. First of all, of course, there are fewer observation points on the blue line, simply because Israeli local elections have been taking place regularly at 5-year intervals, certainly since 1978. Whereas Israeli national elections take place at 4-year intervals maximum, but as we know from the recent past, they certainly since 2019, Israeli elections can also take place at much greater frequency when governments suffer from high rates of instability. Governments can be voted out, and the Knesset may vote for its own premature dissolution. So that explains why the frequency of national elections is quite a bit higher than the frequency of local elections. Now, please consider the early years. So up until the early mid-1960s, national and local elections registered very comparable rates of turnout. And that's not surprising because they actually took place at the same time. But once local and national elections are split and started taking place at different points in time, we start seeing a very important discrepancy. And that discrepancy, the gap between turnout rate nationally and in national and local elections, starts getting wider and wider as the years pass. So clearly, this shows us that on average, there continues to be a strong democratic deficit, if you will, when it comes to local elections. One important explanation for that is the relative lack of power, of effective political power in the hands of local authorities. If they had more authority, if they actually had more significant political clout in the overall architecture of political power in Israel, then that would incentivize voters to turn out in larger numbers to vote. But since power is really centralized in the hands of the national government, it is really not surprising that that's where the voters are going to be focusing more of their effort, and they would be more interested in participating in those polls rather than in local ones. However, there are some important variations we need to be aware of. And one important such variation has to do with the types of municipalities. So now we are looking at turnout rates in different kinds of municipal elections. And here we are just going to be looking at the 4 local elections that were conducted between 2003 all the way to 2018, which was the last election before this one. So this graph, again from the Israel Democracy Institute, shows us information about turnout rates in 3 types of municipalities. At the top, you see the gray line corresponding to municipalities which have a majority Arab population, the population of which is the majority Arab. The blue line corresponds to those municipalities where the population is majority Haredi, or ultra-Orthodox Jewish. And so two important voting minorities in the Israeli political system. And then the lowest line, the red or orange line, corresponds to those municipalities which have a majority of non-ultra-Orthodox, non-Haredi, but Jewish population. And the story could not be more unequivocal and clearer. Electoral turnout in local elections tends to be way higher, significantly greater in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish and in the Arab municipalities. So clearly, there are some municipalities where the argument that I just made with regard to the previous slide, the argument according to which people probably don't participate as much in local elections as they do in national ones because there's far less at stake. This argument clearly doesn't translate in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish and the Arab municipalities. And that also makes sense why these minorities would care so much about about what will go, who the winners will be, and what goes on in their local politics. And largely, if not exclusively, that really has to do with the great importance attached to their unique lifestyle, protecting their very unique local cultures. And that, of course, is a no-brainer when it comes to the Arab population. It's important that schools, it's important that social services, it's important that the general protection and everything that needs looking after to maintain the cultural and social autonomy of the Arab population is going to be looked after by a municipal authority that is clearly dedicated and devoted to that. So that is definitely at stake. And in fact, we see here a very interesting articulation of the turnout gap that characterizes the Israeli Arab population when it comes to municipal and local and national elections. Israeli Arab voters, as you see, almost have a near universal turnout in local elections, whereas in national politics, their participation rate is really much, much lower. Again, because far less is at stake for them in national elections, where only very recently and only for a brief period of time did an Arab political party actually enter an Israeli national coalition government. And a similar argument can, of course, be made that would explain why Haredi, why ultra-Orthodox Jewish voters in their municipalities, where they are a majority, are turning out in far larger numbers. Again, because it matters who controls these municipal authorities in terms of making sure that Haredi lifestyle is going to be strong, is going to be looked after, is going to be protected by the government. So we don't have yet clear data that would break down the municipal authority turnout rates. And again, these will be coming. The elections have just been conducted. These will be coming and will be available very soon. But I do have some random information available that I will show and share with you. For now, let me just highlight and let me just stress that voter turnout rate in general has dropped compared to the previous local election round, compared to 2018 and also compared to 2013. Just under half of the eligible electorate actually participated in the electoral exercise. Now, given what I have just said with respect to variation in electoral turnout rate by the type of municipality, it is not surprising to see, let me show you the next slide, a variation such as this. So here I just wanted to share with you a sense of the dramatic differences that characterize turnout rates from one municipality to another. So on the left-hand side, look at Jerusalem. Jerusalem, of course, is not a Haredi majority municipality, but it does have a large and fast-growing Haredi population. And as a matter of fact, the Haredi political parties scored a major victory in the Jerusalem election by actually now being the largest the largest bloc on the city council. But look at the turnout rate. Just under a third of the eligible electorate actually participated in the Jerusalem elections. Whereas if you look at the other end of the spectrum, Kfar Qasim, an Arab municipality, not surprisingly registered an almost universal turnout rate. So if you look at, and if you're familiar with some of these municipalities, again, it's not going to be a surprise to see why these turnout bars are where they are. This bar chart really articulates the same message about the current election that we have already seen on the previous bar. So in Elad, for example, very, very strong Haredi population, and the leading candidates were actually from the Ashkenazi and from the Sephardic ultra-Orthodox movements, ultra-Orthodox parties. Again, we see very high turnout. Abu Ghosh with just over 80% of turnout. Again, Abu Ghosh is an Arab municipality just on the outskirts of Jerusalem, very high turnout. Modi'in Illit, an ultra-Orthodox municipality, very high electoral turnout. Bnei Brak needs no introduction to anyone familiar with religion and politics in Israel. Very high turnout. Again, a very important municipality in the Haredi world. So in that regard, we see that the municipal elections of 2024 really continued the same pattern as we had seen earlier, and we see that turnout rate was significantly higher in the Arab and the ultra-Orthodox municipalities. Next, I would like to draw attention and take a look at the participation of women and female candidates, both for council and mayoralty. So as I mentioned earlier, the number of women who participated as candidates was just about 15% for the mayoral races. When we look at the actual outcome of the 2,655 council seats that were contested in the election, only 80% were won by women. So considering the size of the female population in the eligible electorate, this is a paltry number. So there is much room for improvement. And when you look at the number of female mayors who were actually successful, so in 2018 there were 14 successful female mayors, and that only increased marginally to 15. So it's still a very, very low number, and there is much to be improved upon. Now, there are a number of important races where gender and the gendered nature of political competition was actually very important. And so I indicated some of these in the orange squares. And if you are an Israeli election junkie, you were probably glued to your screens in the hours when the results were being reported in the evening of February 27th, and then depending on the locality, also on March 10th. But let me say a few words about Netanya. Netanya has a long-standing incumbent mayor, a female incumbent mayor, Miriam Friedberg. Miriam has been in her office for just about 3 decades. And up until the eve of the election, her continuity in office was pretty much taken for granted by most polls and most pundits. And eventually she defended her turf, but it became a very closely contested race. And her challenger was a male politician, but Miriam prevailed. And so Netanya continues to be one of those municipalities. I will show you some other examples where longtime incumbents were able to maintain their dominant position. Now, Haifa was a different story. The mayor of Haifa was also a female labor politician. You might remember, if you paid attention to Haifa politics, that 5 years ago when she entered office, there were some irregularities and some challenges with regard to the nature of her ownership of the labor ticket. Be that as it may, she was eventually duly elected and confirmed. Most polls predicted that she would not be able to continue in her position in this election. And indeed, while Haifa went to a second round, so in the first round, no candidate received the requisite number of votes to win. The two candidates who moved to the runoff were male candidates. So Haifa's female mayor dropped out and fell out of the competition already after the first round. And it's important to note that the person who came back, Yona Yahav, is the mayor whom the incumbent mayor had replaced from office 5 years ago. So that was an interesting story of a comeback. Bet Shemesh is another interesting case where the incumbent mayor, Aliza Bloch, was an Orthodox woman, an Orthodox female politician. She was eventually defeated by an Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox Shmuel Greenberg, who united very successfully the various Ashkenazi factions behind him. So Netanya is a case of a long-term female mayor retaining and holding on her keep, if you will, whereas in Haifa and Bet Shemesh, the shorter-term incumbencies of these female mayors were lost. In Yerucham was interesting, and when I took my students to Israel on our summer program in 2020, well, just last year, we actually visited with the then incumbent mayor, Tal Ohana, and she also met with previous groups, so we had kind of a very nice relationship with the mayor's office in Yerucham. Already in the summer, that there were local polls, and this was something that I was very interested in talking to, not to her, but to people that we met in Yerucham, what the expectation was about her candidacy, and she was replaced. She was replaced by a female challenger. So this was a very interesting case where a woman was running against another woman who was in office. And finally, I wanted to mention briefly the fascinating case of Tel Aviv. Now, Tel Aviv is important not only because of the issue of gender in politics, but Tel Aviv is also important. Let me just show you an image because of who the contenders were. And let me just show you this summary of the actual outcome. Tel Aviv's long-standing mayor is Ron Huldai. You might remember that during the the governmental instability that started in the national level, started in 2019. Ron Huldai experimented briefly with the idea of forming his own political party that would be floated for national elections, and then it didn't go very far. The electors and voters in Tel Aviv like their mayor and their local politicians to focus on local politics and not on national politics so much. And so Ron Huldai remained locally rooted and anchored. His challenger was Orna Barbibai, formerly a minister of economy from the Bennett-Lapid government that was briefly in power from 2021 to 2022. Her candidacy was very much promoted and advocated for by Yesh Atid. So she herself is a Yesh Atid politician and a former national minister in the Yesh Atid-led national government. And in other words, there was a lot of political capital that Yesh Atid, the currently largest opposition party, has invested in this race. And she lost. And as we see from the figure, the gap between her performance and the vote share that Ron Huldai was able to hold on was really quite significant. So this is a very important additional scene, if you will, that I wanted to share with you from the local political arenas. Moving on very quickly, and there are just a couple more points that I would like to highlight. I did want to share with you this page, and similar pages were, of course, widely circulating in Israel in preparation for the polls. This just gives you a sense of some of the long-standing mayors that were in office. Some of them, as I mentioned, Miriam Freiberg was able to hold on to her office after 24 years in office, so now she's looking for another 5, possibly. Ron Huldai spent already 25 years in office, and if he completes this term, he will be there for another 5. So he will have completed then 3 decades in office. But in some cases, for example, in Holon, the mayor who was in office for 3 decades was replaced and didn't do well at all in the national in the race. So there were some very interesting, and this was definitely one of the important aspects of the local election of 2024, in addition to turnout, in addition to organizing how soldiers will vote and making sure that the legality and then the logistics of that would properly be set up. So a lot of media attention was paid to some of these long-term incumbents. There are 2 more points that I would like to mention. One with respect to some of the real surprisingly large victories that were scored by some of the incumbent and some of the non-incumbent mayoral candidates. And then I would like to close by highlighting a couple of important points with respect to what the elections actually mean for national elections and the ongoing dynamics of party politics in the Knesset. So some of the largest margins by which the victors of the mayoral races won were the following. As I mentioned earlier already, Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem had a very low turnout rate, as you see, just over 30%. And that certainly contributed to, but it definitely was not the exclusive reason why Moshe Leon, the incumbent mayor, was able to hold on to his keep. By most polls, Moshe Leon was considered an extremely popular mayor of the city. Worked very hard for the various populations. In fact, his campaign slogan, Moshe Leon doeg lekulam, he cares for everyone. It was an interesting development from the campaign slogan that he used in his 2018 race campaign, when he said, Moshe Leon doeg lecha, I'm worried, I'm concerned, I care for you. So now Moshe Leon's campaign really highlighted his accomplishments, achievements, and the services that he was able to provide for the broadest spectrum of his constituency. including Arabs, including Jews, including Hilonim, including modern Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox. So really, the campaign focused on Moshe Leon being the champion of all. And it resonated. It resonated even though there was a very strong challenge initially. It seemed like a strong challenge that would be mounted against him by Yossi Havilio. Again, not a newcomer to local politics in Israel. He was also a very well-known candidate in the last election, and also a councilman. Yossi Havilio's candidacy was important because it showed one of the local arenas where various local and national political parties from the progressive and left of center bloc of the Israeli party system actually united, trying to unseat the incumbent mayor. So behind Yossi Havilio, you had a number of progressive local lists, Hitorerut, Yerushalayim, but you also had Yesh Atid, you also had Meretz, you had Avodah, so some of the most important national left-wing and center-left political parties uniting and supporting his candidacy. But it came to no avail. Probably one of the, and I'm not going to show you all these examples, but some I would still like to. Beersheba was remarkable, not only because here the local turnout rate actually corresponded very closely to the national turnout rate. National turnout was just under 50%. Here, turnout rate was just over 40%. But what's interesting is that Danilovich, the incumbent mayor, ran uncontested. Now, initially, it seemed that there would be some challengers, but again, his popularity is so well established, and his hold on power is so consolidated, and he's so well regarded as the right mayor for Beersheba that no one actually ran. There was thus no choice. So the vote really was an approval vote for his continuation in office. And if you look at that rate of victory of 96.7%, that really is quite remarkable. Rishon LeZion, again, with a very high, very wide margin of victory, and the same can be observed in the two parts of Modi'in. Again, you have Modi'in and then Modi'in Elite. The latter is an ultra-Orthodox municipality, but in both parts of Modi'in, the voter turnout rate voter turnout was very high, and the margin by which the winning candidate won was also very high. The last point I would like to highlight has to do with winners and losers. There is no doubt, and it's very rare to find Israelis or Jews to agree on anything. It's even harder to find pundits and political analysts agree on the proper interpretation of results. But certainly across the board, analysts seem to agree that the largest victory in this election was scored by the Haredi parties, the ultra-Orthodox parties, both Ashkenazi and Shas in particular. Not only did they increase significantly the number of seats that they control on municipalities, even when they don't win and when they don't control the mayorship, for example, Jerusalem. Moshe Leon is a modern Orthodox, not an ultra-Orthodox mayor, but on council, now it is the ultra-Orthodox who rule. And that is one pattern, that is one expression of the great gains that the Haredi parties made. Another one is the significant rise in the mayorships that they won and that they wrested. Now, it's also interesting to note that in many, many instances, the Ashkenazi and the ultra-Orthodox parties, and of course, this makes sense. It follows from the nature of the electoral system. They actually went at each other. And they competed sometimes quite ferociously against each other. So the election didn't really see any kind of unity between Sephardi and Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox movements and political parties. But again, that's really written into the game. In some instances, for example, in Tzafat, the ultra-Orthodox parties were actually able to unseat even the well-entrenched local mayor, in this case, an established Likudnik, So a local mayor was supported by the national governing party, the largest national governing party, Likud. And that was a major victory because while there is a very sizable ultra-Orthodox population in Tzafat, they are not a majority, but yet they were able to consolidate the votes enough in order to score this success. So what can we extrapolate from this information when it comes to the involvement and the role that the Haredi parties will play in national political life? My friends, as you know, or you might have paid attention to this, there are some very potent and very burning issues on the national political scene that have to do with the Haredim. And certainly with the ongoing war in Gaza, the issue of Giyus and the issue of Haredi conscription, once again, just last week there was a very important ruling and issue on this front that was on the front pages of several Israeli newspapers. So this issue is not going to go away. It cannot. Israeli governments will have to deal with the issue of Haredi conscription, and that means that the battle between the ultra-Orthodox populations, their political parties, and the various solutions that governments might propose for their inclusion and for their drafting into the army will go unabated. But it will go unabated with a seemingly more assertive and stronger Haredi population. And it's important to note that if we can use these elections as a barometer for how voters are going to be voting in the various localities in the next national election, that might also mean that we will see an even stronger performance of Haredi political parties, so the constituents of United Torah Judaism, Aguda, and Degel HaTorah, as well as Shas on the Sephardic side, in the next national elections. And so that is a very important extrapolation. And we don't like looking into a crystal ball, but if there is a crystal ball that we can shape out of this local election, then this might be one of the important visions emanating from this crystal ball, that we can very well anticipate stronger and improved electoral success by Haredi political parties in the next national election, in the localities where they have, as we saw in the local elections, they did exceptionally well. And that may very well improve their standing and their position in the national party system, which will mean an ongoing potential to blackmail, if you will, and even decide what kind of a coalition government might be formed after the next national elections are concluded. Finally, I want to mention briefly that another political party where it was quite clear to see relative losers against relative winners had to do with the political party I mentioned at the beginning, National Unity, led by Benny Gantz, and its junior faction, Tikva Hadasha, led by Gideon Sar, former member and senior politician, formerly from the Likud. Gideon Sar, both of these factions, if you will, participated in local elections for the first time. Gideon Sar did much better. In several instances, for example, in Ramat Gan, his own personal protege and also a former Likud politician won the election, and Gideon Sar invested a lot of his personal attention and personal political capital into that outcome. And that's not the only case. There are about 4 mayorships where Gideon Sar's candidates prevailed. Benny Gantz cannot claim that. So clearly, when we use the number of mayorships and the number of council seats that these two factions of the National Unity Knesset party gained, the junior partner, Gideon Sar's faction did better. So it is not surprising that a few days after the local elections were over, Gideon Sar bolted from that joint faction that they had formed prior to the previous national election. Again, there is a sense that the electoral barometer provided by the local election shows a more assertive, a more successful, and electorally more appealing Gideon Sa'ar and his party compared to Benny Gantz. And if that's the case, then perhaps we can also see some kind of a realignment of the political right in the Israeli national scene. I'm not suggesting necessarily a gradual or an immediate return of Gideon Sa'ar to Likud. He ruled that out, but I definitely can imagine a gradual return to normalizing his own personal and his party's relationship with the government and the coalition that is currently led by Mr. Netanyahu. So these are some of the important consequences that I think we can already derive from the very early quick analysis of what transpired in the 2024 Israeli local elections. So I'm going to stop right here. We are a nice, intimate group, so I think we can just, if you have any questions, comments, please don't drop them in the chat. Just raise your hand or let me just remove the spotlight if I can, so we could see each other. And let me know if you have any comments, questions, and we'll still have a few minutes before 1 o'clock. If any.
Hi, Dr. Nikolenyi.
Hi.
Hi, great talk. It was very interesting.
Oh, Jonathan, hi.
Hi, how are you? And I actually voted here in the local Haifa Carmel election. And I found it a little bit confusing because they had two elections going up once on the same day. There was the election for the candidate of Haifa Carmel and also for which party is going to run the small city that you're in. So you voted for two things at once, and it wasn't so clear if one of the candidates was specifically linked to one of those small city votes. And I wanted to put my vote in for a candidate of Haifa Carmel. And then for the other one, I didn't know exactly for my specific city who to vote for, if it was linked, if I was countering my original vote.
So what did you end up doing? So you voted for a candidate for mayor?
Yeah.
And then you abstained with the other one. You didn't?
No, I voted, but I asked the people in the room, and they said, you're not allowed to ask, you're not allowed to tell him. It's like you're telling him who to vote for. Someone started to tell me, like, it's not really related, it's kind of related. So I voted actually for one of them. But I knew which mayor I wanted to vote for because he was here at the mall and he was the challenger I voted for. He didn't win. And I just felt like he could have used some change around here. So
thank you for sharing, Jonathan. And let me just maybe quickly just react to an important point that you mentioned. There are really two kinds of political parties running lists. Now, so not for mayor, let's just talk about the white ballot. There are parties that are purely local. For example, the mayor of Netanya ran her own local list. One Netanya, similar to One Jerusalem that Moshe Leon formed and so it's a very purely local list. Then there are also lists that are run locally by the national political parties. So in Beersheba, for example, Likud ran its own list. Now, sometimes this can go really wild because in the local association of a national political party, sometimes there are bitter struggles in terms of whom does the national political party actually support. So in Beersheba, there were two Likud lists running, right? So sometimes it can be really confusing. So you have local and you have national list. Now, in some cases, the national and local political parties join, so they can run a joint list. And that's certainly what happened. There was a a very interesting phenomenon. Let me just see if I can share that particular image. Let me just show you this. So there was a very interesting phenomenon in this local election, which saw the formation of a front that was called the José Hadash, or the New Contract. The New Contract was essentially a broad electoral alliance that brought together some progressive, so definitely anti-national government, national parties and local parties in various localities. And here on this image, you see that there were 26 municipalities where parties such as Meretz or Avoda and Yesh Atid formed an alliance together, sometimes together also with locally specific parties, in order to represent a common platform. So this can be really confusing unless you pay attention and you inform yourself from the information that the ministry provides. Now, one good thing is, and this is really one of the beauties of Israeli democracy, electoral democracy, that if a national political party can also choose, instead of or in addition to running its own list in a municipality, to affiliate with itself a local list. So if that happens, they have to register such affiliation. This is part of the law on municipal authorities. It has a particular article that deals with elections, and they have to register it. So they have to register Sia Am and the Sia Bet. So Likud, for example, or also Yesh Atid, had to tell the Interior Ministry in which municipalities they are running on their own, and in their own list, and in which, sorry about that, and in which municipalities they are supporting affiliated lists. And so, but this it's public information, but you really have to search, and it's only available in Hebrew and Arabic, so English doesn't get you very far. So if you're an Olei Hadash, you kind of have to get help. Not that you need, I mean, I know you speak you're in all the languages of Israel, but I'm not speaking about you, Jonathan, but just in general. So the information is there, but the information is not communicated to you easily on the day of the election. So, but it's information that's definitely there. And since we are talking about this, let me just show you one other graph, which I prepared, but I decided not to share during the talk. This is the distribution. This bar chart shows the distribution of how many lists the different national political parties and their affiliates were fielded in the election. So clearly you see, and I distinguish between the parties that are in the national government today. So these are Likud and the various religious parties. And then on the right-hand side, you see the various opposition parties. So you see that Likud, Shas, and Degel HaTorah, one of the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox parties, as well as the religious Zionist party led by Bezalel Smotrich, they definitely ran the largest number of lists, either directly or indirectly. So it's not surprising that they did so well at the polls. You run more candidates for mayor and for council, you win more. I mean, there's a greater likelihood. The opposition parties, ranging from Yisrael Beteinu, Yesh Atid, and all the way, they really fielded a lot fewer lists than the national opposition parties. So what does this information show us? This information shows us that all those tens of thousands of candidates that I mentioned at the beginning were overwhelmingly fielded by local political forces and political parties that belong to the coalition government nationally. Put all of that together, this election was really an important success for the Israeli right and for the Israeli religious forces. Jonathan, thank you for sharing that very personal experience. This is wonderful. Thank you.
You mentioned also that you were going to talk about how soldiers voted from inside Gaza.
Yeah. Oh, maybe you weren't here, but I did mention it.
They
Maybe,
brought them the ballots
yeah,
inside.
yeah. So I'm going to definitely I will show you. So when we'll do the recording of this talk, I will definitely send it to you, and I will can send you the slides as well. But yes, so there were 12 special polling stations set up, and the soldiers had to manually write in on their ballots on the yellow petak whom they wanted as for mayor in the municipality where they are otherwise registered as voters, and on the white ballot they had to indicate the party that they support. So their ballots were not pre-printed. And the IDF had its dedicated page. It's still live, so you can still visit it. Has its dedicated page to the electoral exercise and process, and what they did and how they worked together with the Interior Ministry to distributing the polling and how they set up the polling stations. Now, this is very interesting because Gaza is not Israel, right? And normally, if you're an Israeli, but you can't vote in Montreal unless you're part of the diplomatic mission. Like Israel doesn't allow expatriate voting.
Yeah.
So particularly the Hayalim were outside Israel, so it wasn't clear that they could vote. So it actually required a legislative amendment. So the Knesset actually had to look at this and had to authorize that this could be done. And so it's very important to point out that none of this was ad hoc. So again, it's just important to note the painstaking and close attention that the Israeli political institutions pay to maintaining and ensuring that the institutions and the rules of electoral democracy are safeguarded every step of the way. So I wanted to highlight that. And I will definitely send you, Jonathan, if you would like to see some of those images and the videos about that the IDF created to help soldiers understand how to vote.
Yeah, they had very nice videos coming out, so I didn't see any about the election.
Oh, I'll be happy to share. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks. Let me see if there is any question in the chat.
Question?
Yes, please.
Another Jonathan. I may have missed, I don't know whether you discussed the relationship between the results of the municipal elections and what was going on in Israel prior to October 7th. In other words, the mass rallies and marches. Are there implications from the current election results with regard to what will happen that way?
Well, so this is a very important question, and thank you for raising that. There is no doubt that if October 7th hadn't happened, and this is a very important counterfactual to ask and to think about, I think that very few people would doubt that the outcome of the local elections would have been very different. After October 7th, I mean, Israel was in a judicial reform frenzy. The forces of the anti-judicial reform movement were gaining with every passing week more and more ground. They were creating and establishing stronger political voice, greater political space, and definitely the formation of the new contract, this alliance that I showed the flyer of, was definitely the outgrowth, if you will, of the protest movement. Now, with October 7th, that came to a halt. The protest movement came to a halt. Israel was facing military mobilization, underwent military mobilization, and then entered a war against Hamas. And that changed everything. When the nation is at war, only now, several months later, do we start seeing the return to Kaplan, the return to the protests. And the protests are really about the hostages. So even these protests are really about the war and what's at stake and what the objectives of the war should be. But the protest movement, as we had known it prior to October 7th, so kind of took a back seat. It's coming back, but in a different form. And definitely October 7th and the war has created a rallying around the flag effect, and the nation really pulls together from left to right, from Hiloni to Haredi, to be together. So that particular division has, I think, significantly subsided, and I think that explains some of these results and some of what we see. I would venture to say that the outcome in Tel Aviv might very well have been different. I mean, Ron Huldai won, but his margin, like, he still is a majority, but it's a narrower majority. Yesh Atid might very well have been better placed to capitalize on the Kaplan force and the protest movement if October 7th hadn't happened. And so I think that's you're raising a very, very important question, and I can't thank you enough for it.
May I ask?
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to get my head straight so I can say it properly. The statements by President Biden and the Senate leader, Chuck Schumer, in essence, is a call for new elections at the national level. Yeah. Again, given the results of the municipality elections, are Biden and Schumer just sort of out of touch? Would they really expect some revolutionary change if an election took place now?
So another wonderful question. Let me make 2 points. One, under Israeli law, you can just call an election so easily. I mean, the Knesset would have to vote for its own dissolution, and that can, of course, happen. It's unlikely to happen under foreign pressure of the sort, but let's imagine that a Knesset vote were to pass and new elections were called for. It takes another 90 days before the actual election will be held. So if elections were called tomorrow, so March 25th, the actual election would not, this is not Canada. Like, Israel is not, in Canada, elections can be held in a month, and it's very, very quick. But in Israel, the campaign, the process that sets up is 3 times as long. So it takes 3 months. So we would be having elections in April, May, June. So it's really quite some time away, and much can happen in those intervening 3 months. So that's one important point. I honestly don't think that either the president or Congressman Schumer are paying attention to that level of detail. I don't think so. Secondly, my sense of what's behind these statements by these very strong American political leaders is that it's not that they are out to lunch, but they are seeking a change in the senior leadership of the Israeli government. Now, if we extrapolate from the results of the local elections, I think there is little doubt that if elections were held 3 months from now, a right religious coalition would come back to power again. I just don't really see the country going any other way. If anything, the rallying around the flag effect would further strengthen sort of the conservative nationalist forces in the party system. But it's an open question whether Mr. Netanyahu continues as the standard bearer of Likud, the largest party of the right religious camp and the right religious coalition. He has not said anything about him stepping down or even opening up his incumbency to a leadership test or a leadership challenge. But that's an open question. Whether there would be a leadership challenge from within Likud, whether there would be any kind of leadership turnover prior to the opening of the campaign, that's an important variable. So Mr. Netanyahu may still go on his own. The party might decide to put somebody else, or there may very well be a leadership primary. in Likud that might result in the victory of another politician at the helm of the party. All of that can change the equations, and also the fact the timing of such, if there is such leadership change, the timing of such leadership change might also strongly affect when, if at all, fresh elections would be called. So I think these are some of the variables that we certainly didn't see either Schumer or President Biden comment on. But again, this is a level of detail that's, I think, important to keep in mind because they nuance how some of these processes might unfold. Jonathan, did that answer the question?
Thank you very much. I do appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. I don't see any other hands or comments. So with your permission, I'm going to bring this Lunch and Learn to a close. I do want to thank each and every one of you for joining. If you were joining us from Montreal, I hope you will continue enjoying your lunch break. And if you're joining us from Israel, as Jonathan, I guess you're in Israel still. Yeah. So if you're joining,
I'm here.
if you're joining us from Israel, thank you for calling in from the early evening hours, and wishing you a wonderful rest of the evening. So looking forward to seeing everyone. Please consider joining us on Monday. We will have a hybrid event, a book launch, when we will celebrate the hot off the press publication of a new book by Professor Guy Ziv from the American University in Washington. His book is titled Netanyahu versus the Generals, The Battle for Israel's Future. And if you join us in person, you can partake in our pizza lunch. And if you register and you show up either in person or on Zoom, you will be entered in a draw, and the prizes will be copies of Dr. Ziv's book. So please consider joining us either on Zoom. More information and details are posted on our website. And as always, we look forward to welcoming you back to another event held here at the Azrieli Institute of Israel Studies. Bye, everyone.